Today we're cooking from Beyond Bacon, Paleo Recipes that Respect the Whole Hog. The recipe that was chosen for us today is one with an intimidating reputation. It's a soufflé, a spinach and bacon soufflé, savory, and it's got the added complications being from a paleo book of being dairy-free and grain-free. I was happy when this book was selected for the project because I don't have a lot of experience cooking from it, and I'd like to broaden my horizons and try some of these new things out. Having to do a dairy-free, grain-free souffle right out of the gate, we'll see how that goes. The recipe looks pretty simple, and it starts right off by saying don't be intimidated by the souffle, that it's a winning combination of ingredients, and yes, it's supposed to rise and fluff up and all of that, but even if it sinks, no big deal, because it's still going to taste great. It was nice that the recipe description kind of removed those high expectations and said it's okay if it doesn't quite turn out the way you might expect a souffle to, that it's still going to taste good, and that was reassuring. There's some vagueness here and there in the recipe that I think will make it hard to get those technicalities right, but with their reassurances, I'm not so worried about that. Let's dig right in and see how it goes. I've got everything we need for our souffle laid out on the board here, so let's run through them. 2 cups of young spinach leaves, lightly packed. 3 slices of bacon. The book has a recipe for homemade bacon, but this is just store-bought thick cut. We'll want to cut it into 1/2-inch squares. 2 cups of unsweetened almond milk. 1 tablespoon of lard. I had this in the back of my fridge from a pork butt I cooked a while ago. 1 yellow onion. I wish they gave a volume or weight or something, because onions come in all sizes. I used 1½ small onions and diced them finely. 4 tablespoons arrowroot powder. 2 tablespoons tapioca flour. A teaspoon of black pepper and 1½ teaspoons of salt. And finally, 6 eggs. We want to separate them, and we'll only use 5 of the yolks. When separating your eggs, it's important to use a third bowl to catch the individual whites. We need them to whip up into stiff peaks later, and even a tiny bit of yolk will make that difficult. I had 1 yolk break on me right out of the shell, and that could have ruined the whole batch. Now that our ingredients have been prepped, the next thing to do is prepare our pan. I wrestled with this for about 5 minutes, and I couldn't begin to tell you why. We need to take a sheet of aluminum foil, long enough to go around our dish, and fold it in half. Rub the lard to cover the inside of the pan, and also 1 whole side of the foil sheet. Coat the greased up surfaces with the tapioca flour and shake off the excess. This is probably a good time to bring up that the book just says you need a soufflé dish, but you know what? Soufflé dishes come in an infinite array of sizes and shapes. It's kind of critical information to know what size and shape this recipe was developed for. Too big a pan and you'll have a thin, dense soufflé. Too small and it'll overflow the pan and collapse, or you'll have extra batter that'll go to waste. And who has a dedicated soufflé pan anyway? The book has photos of their dish, but there's nothing I could use for scale to even guess their size. I had a deep 6-inch cake pan, and that's what I'm using here. As we'll see later, that turned out to be too small. Anyway, with the dish and the foil greased and floured, wrap the foil around the dish, greased side in, and fold the ends together to secure it tightly into place. It will have to hold its shape in the oven. Speaking of which, you'll need to get a shallow baking pan large enough to hold your soufflé dish, fill it with water about a 1/2 inch deep, and put it into the oven while it preheats to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. This will give your soufflé some gentle heat insulation as it cooks. With our pan ready and the oven heating, we can begin making the soufflé batter. We begin by putting a large skillet on medium heat and adding the bacon and onion. The book says to cook for about 8 minutes, until the bacon is crispy and the onion is soft. It sounds easy enough, but I found both things couldn't be true. If the bacon gets crispy, so will the onion. To get the bacon to render, and to keep the onion from frying in that fat, I had to keep a close eye on it. It took me about 15 minutes to get the bacon fully cooked through, though it wasn't what I would call crispy, and I managed to keep the onion from turning brown and crunchy. When it's done, put it all on paper towels to drain and cool. I'll admit I was surprised they didn't have you try to save the tasty bacon fat for another use, and I hurt a little to watch the paper towels soak it all up. Next, in a large saucepan, heat up the almond milk until it just starts to bubble. Slowly add in the arrowroot powder and whisk for about 2 minutes to keep lumps from forming while the mixture thickens. Remove that from the heat. Then, the book says to add the bacon and onions to the simmering milk and stir. I hate to harp on the technical writing in this recipe, but we just took it off the heat in the previous step, and it's no longer simmering. I wish recipe writers had a better eye for spotting this sort of confusing detail. Now, in a separate bowl, beat the egg yolks with the salt and pepper. We need to mix this into the hot milk, but if we dump it in, we'll get scrambled eggs. So we can gently bring the eggs up to temperature by slowly stirring in about a third of the milk into the eggs to temper them, and then slowly stir the tempered eggs back into the rest of the milk, bacon, and onion. We're almost done, but first we need to whip up those egg whites until they form stiff peaks. The whisk attachment on my immersion blender did it in just a few seconds. I did have to transfer them into a larger bowl midway through because I misjudged just how much they'd fluff up. The book says to fold them into the milk mixture along with the spinach leaves. I did the leaves first while I was whipping the egg whites to give the leaves a chance to wilt in the hot liquid. I was concerned they might make the soufflé watery if they waited until the oven to start softening. So I first folded in the spinach and then carefully folded in the egg whites. We need them to stay fluffy so the soufflé will rise in the oven, so be as gentle with this step as you possibly can. Finally, carefully and slowly pour it all into our prepared dish and put that into the larger pan with the hot water in the 425 oven. Here's where I realized I guessed too small on the size of the soufflé dish and had to get several smaller ramekins to hold the excess. I didn't want it to go to waste. The book says to bake for 40 minutes, or until the top is golden brown and the soufflé has risen. Of course, that will depend heavily on the size of your dishes, so I guess make adjustments that make sense to you. I'll be checking my smaller ones after 20 minutes, and be careful not to jiggle and collapse the large one in the process. I have this book because my eldest child has a wheat sensitivity and has been gluten-free since childhood. When we were first navigating how to cook gluten-free, there weren't a whole lot of resources out there. This was, 15 years ago or so. The paleo diet was kind of at the height of its popularity, and one of its cornerstones is eating gluten-free. And I first got this book here, Eat Like a Dinosaur. It's kids' recipes that are all gluten-free, and it's from a paleo perspective, but the important part again was the lack of gluten in all the recipes. And it's stereotypical favorite recipes for kids. Each recipe has a ways that kids can help you in the kitchen, which was nice. So whenever they came up with kind of a grown-up sequel to that, which was this one, I got it as well. When it's finished baking, gently remove it from the oven and allow it to sit in the water bath in a quiet environment for about 15 minutes before removing it from the bath and taking off the aluminum foil collar. It's still quite fragile at this point, and any rough handling can make it all collapse. After mine is cooled, I can see that it did rise and then fall again. I would have liked it to be taller, but it's not completely collapsed, and I have hope it will still be fluffy inside. The only way to tell, though, is to cut into it and see. It was soft and bouncy as I scooped into it, and inside it's not goopy or anything disappointing. It's fluffy, and you can see lots of air bubbles throughout. I think the egg whites couldn't quite hold the weight of the spinach, bacon, and onion, and I can see that some of the custard is separated out into large curds. It's not dense, though, like a quiche filling. I'm pleasantly surprised at how well it held the air. But how does it taste? Everybody else in the house decided they wanted one of the smaller ones as their side for the meal that night. So that left the big one just for me. And I scooped some out to try here on camera. And I ate the whole thing, like not just the whole bit that I scooped out, but I went back and had some more and then had some more. And I thought maybe I'd save some for the next day, but I ended up eating the entire thing pretty much for my dinner that night. So successful recipe in that respect. The more I ate it, the more I wanted to eat, and it tasted better and better as I went on. The first few bites, though, I wasn't so sure. The flavors were strong. They were like it tasted nutritious, healthy. I missed the richness that I would expect from a soufflé. Not having the cheeses and the cream and those other rich aspects that you would expect from a soufflé. I missed those right out of the gate. It was like, it tastes too healthy. But it wasn't that many bites before the good flavors won out over what I was missing, and I was able to focus on what was there and how great those tasted. The texture was good. It wasn't like super fluffy. You saw it did fall a little bit, but it wasn't dense like say a breakfast egg dish, like a strata or something like a breakfast casserole. It wasn't dense like that, so it still had that fluffiness to it. Looked simple going in, and as I was making it, it sort of got more and more complicated as I didn't know what to expect, and the recipe wasn't clear in some key places. I think I will make this again. I know now like where the vagueness in the recipe is. I can make some adjustments moving forward to go with what I have and make it work a little bit better technically. But the flavors are on point. My eldest kid with the gluten sensitivity has all grown up now, moved away to college. I don't have to cook gluten-free as much anymore, but I'm glad I still have books like this on the shelf that I can flip through, because there's some good looking ones in here, and it's nice to broaden the horizons. I'm glad you joined me on this adventure where we learn not to be afraid of soufflés. Even if they fall, odds are they're still going to taste delicious, and they're worth making, sometimes even without the cream and other dairy. Oh, you're going to go back up? I love hearing from you, so leave comments. Tell me about adjustments to recipes you've had to make for allergies or other diet reasons, and subscribe for more. We've got many adventures up ahead. See you then.